Have you ever pondered the meaning of life? Some say it's about making money. For others, it's about adventure. Others again will tell you it's about following your passions or finding love. Well, they're all equally wrong. Life is an ongoing quest to become undeniably, overwhelmingly, infallibly the coolest cat in town. I'm talking leather jackets, I'm talking cool mats games, I'm talking shiny Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and of course, I'm talking dragons. These scaly bastards are staples of fantasy the world over, from Europe where they breed fire and hoard gold, to Asia where they bring life and have really kick-ass moustaches. And since the gaming zeitgeist draws on folklore the same way a chain smoker draws on a cigarette, there's no shortage of representation for dragons in video games. We've got Dragon Age, Dragon's Dogma, Dragon Quest, Dungeons and Dragons, Double Dragon, Dragon Ball Z, Enter the Dragon, Drag Racing, Drag Queens, the list just goes on. And of course, how can we forget about the OG dragon of gaming, Spyro the motherfucking purple dragon. The original Spyro trilogy were 3D platformers that came out on the PS1 between 1998 and 2000. It was this series that put Insomniac Games on the map, who would go on to make Ratchet & Clank, Resistance, and more recently, Kids These Days Simulator. I've yet to play this trilogy, considering that I'm quite literally the same age as the first one. I was too busy breastfeeding and lacking cognitive ability back then to really appreciate their finer qualities.
What about Nasty Newark?
What the shit is that? Regardless, the critical and commercial success of these games led to 8 more Spyro games being pumped out by various studios on various platforms between 2001 and 2005. However, as the games kept coming, the review scores kept dropping. So, some exec somewhere decided a hard reboot was in order. Enter the Legend of Spyro trilogy. The Legend of Spyro The Eternal Night came out in late 2007, developed by Chrome Studios, the guys that made Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, magnum opus, and later The Force Unleashed. The game follows directly on from the first title in the trilogy, A New Beginning, in terms of story, and as you'd imagine shares many similarities in terms of gameplay. The game opens with a quick recap of events thus far. To synopsize, Spyro went and fought a female dragon called Cinder, who was under the control of this evil entity referred to as the Dark Master. Spyro defeats her, freeing her from the DM's clutches and brings her back to the Dragon Temple. However, in doing so he loses all his powers, reducing him to an admittedly fabulous but otherwise useless lizard. The animation here is solid enough, but why so overexposed, bro? Sparx here looks like he's fucking radioactive. The first proper scene shows Spyro snoozing outside the Dragon Temple. Sparx comes out all happy-go-lucky and Spyro's like, the fuck you want?
Huh. Why do I have to want something? I'm just ready to begin the best day ever now that the evil psycho she-dragon is gone.
What? Cinder? What do you mean, Sparx?
You might be noticing that the voice acting here is quite good, at least when compared to
Nasty Newark,
and perhaps oddly familiar. Our protagonist here is voiced by none other than Master Frodo himself, Elijah Wood, in all of his eternally 12-year-old looking glory. The voice of Sparx is attributed to Billy West, who was responsible for much of the voice work on Futurama and Ren and Stimpy. Cinder is voiced by Mae Whitman, aka Katara from Avatar, among several other beloved cartoon heroines. And to top it off, Ignitus, this proud red dragon here, is voiced by Gary fucking Oldman, who's played more badass roles than I can count. Spyro and Sparx go and search around the temple gardens for Cinder, sneaking their way past the sleeping guardian dragons. I have to admit, this game's visuals are awesome. The in-engine cutscenes are smooth, the art assets and colour palettes are varied, and the aesthetic overall is crisp and congruent. The pair come across Cinder after bumbling around punching weeds for a bit. She's as emo as her design would suggest, spouting some edgy "it's not a phase, mom" grandiloquence.
I'm leaving, Spyro. I don't belong here.
I hurt myself today to see if I still feel.
Then she exits stage left, leaving Spyro so blue-balled he passes out. This begins the first of 4 dream sequences, during which Spyro goes to this ethereal realm to awaken one of his 4 elemental powers. He's guided by the voice of an ancient dragon calling himself the Chronicler, played by Martin Jarvis, who aids Spyro through the lost art of extended tutorial. Spyro also gains this dragon time ability here, a mechanic which will later be seen to be pivotal to both combat and platforming. At the end of the path, the Chronicler tells him to
Seek me out
and boots him back to the waking world. Spyro rises to find the temple under attack from these ape raiders, some of whom you encounter almost immediately. The Legend of trilogy went out of its way to be more combat focused than previous installments, and this is the first real introduction thereof. There's the basic single button mash melee attack, as well as a lift that can allow for a few free hits on most standard enemies, and a ground pound that can be used to stun. Then there's the 4 elemental breaths. Fire allows you to breathe fire. Fucking mind-blowing, I know, and allows you to perform a sustained charge attack. Ice lets you fire freezing projectiles and do a spin attack with a knockback. Earth gives you a flail to slap enemies around with, and a pound that knocks anything nearby into the air. It's all so fucking trashed here, so
forget about it.
Lastly, electricity allows Spyro to deploy a glorified C4 charge and gives him a spin attack that hits harder than your abusive stepdad. Each element has a fury attack with a sweet animation that invariably ruins the day of all bad guys in Spyro's vicinity. Throw all this together and you have a reasonably deep combat system system by platformer standards. Man, for real though, this Earth shit is fucking useless. I mean, the dude looks like a Yoshi doing ballet for fuck's sake. Every enemy appears to have its own unique name that I have to imagine are randomly generated from a pool of stock fantasy words. This is pretty cute for all the humanoid enemies. Makes them seem like a little more than just the interchangeable AIs that they are. Where this cuteness evaporates is when they start giving spiders and dogs these noble highborn names, like Goober Deathtracker, or Liquizid Gashweasel, or Eside Warlizard, because he clearly wasn't good enough for the A through D sides. You fight your way through the crumbling temple, an underground cavern, and a giant mushroom valley until Spyro arrives back at the spot where he started. He finds Gary Old Dragon dealing with some raiders the same way a cloud of mustard gas deals with a picnic date. When a new wave is airdropped in and approaches him like a gang of greasers, he channels his inner ballistic missile and fucking disintegrates them. Spyro is left to finish off the stragglers and then has to defeat this assassin dude in a gameplay scenario that I refuse to refer to as a boss fight. Seeing as, for its duration, Spyro is locked into a 2D plane while the dude bobs his head up and down for you to fire charge shots at. He pisses off when he's defeated with the rest of his posse and the dragons convene to discuss what went down. Spyro spills his guts about his dreams, and let it be noted that while Elijah Wood is an acclaimed actor, his voice performance here is hammier than a big ham sandwich going ham on a ham radio.
A tree? I've seen that tree. In my dreams.
Upon hearing about the Chronicler, the Guardian Dragons are all like,
Now that's a name I've not heard in a long time.
and start hyping him up as this ancient super dragon of yore.
Tales of the Chronicler are often interwoven with tales of doom.
Oh, goody. I was afraid we might have to spend the rest of the night without any more doom.
I fucking love this guy. The dragons disperse on various missions, leaving young Perp to go in search of that tree that the Chronicler showed him. The dynamic duo arrive in an ancient grove, with Sparx weaving the very fibers of my soul into his every sentiment.
Well, sure, if you ignore all the evil beasts and visions of doom and eternal darkness, which sounds lovely, by the way. Oh, and the fact that we now get to frolic through the magical creepy forest in search of some stupid tree? What's not to love?
This stage opens with some artificial challenged non-enemies that latch onto Spyro and make him move at a crawl. I'm not ashamed to admit it took me over 10 minutes to figure out how to deal with these little shits and advance beyond this first area. You fight some pallet-swapped wolves and some troll dudes who are all like,
What are you doing in my swamp?
After your combat fix, the stage presents you with the first meaty platforming challenge of the game. Spyro being one of the granddaddies of the 3D platformer, the Eternal Night is unsurprisingly solid in this facet of its design. He has a jump, double jump and a glide, allowing for a laudable degree of accuracy as you hop from branches to ledges to what appear to be the discarded nipple piercings of a giant. Dragon time is often incorporated to reach fast-moving platforms or to use rotating ones. One issue I do have is that it's virtually impossible to make a direct vertical descent due to Spyro having a near constant forward momentum. I will say though, his jump arc is spot on. Not so floaty that tapping X fires him out into deep space, not so weighty that he plummets to earth like a red brick pheasant. After a couple of platforming segments and a gauntlet of enemies, the pair wander out of the brush, Sparx eating random butterflies and just spreading God's word. They stumble across a gang of pirates hunting beasts to imprison for gladiatorial combat. So, in an act of immeasurable bravery, Spyro eats shit and goes back to the tutorial dimension. When he wakes up, now with his ice powers, Sparx is being chased by the aforementioned scurvy dogs, so Spyro does a big old frowny and wipes their poop decks.
Did you get that? That was a pirate joke.
A platforming sequence follows that uses the ice projectile to create floating platforms on bodies of water, diversifying the application of the mechanic in a way that fits thematically. Spyro scales some cages to get onto the pirate ship and then uses their cannon to advance.
Fly me to the moon.
Man, that is one dank PS2 skybox. There's another one of those on-rails flying dude fights that don't even fucking register, and then you arrive at this chasm of huge trees and giant forest jellyfish. When you finally clear this area and finish neutering Inoxaval fucking Tearshine Esquire, Spyro comes across the tree from his dreams and immediately realizes he has no idea why he's there. Luckily, the tree transforms into a convenient awful boss to at least give our little purple friend some catharsis. It's just more of the flappy shooting gallery garbage stretched over the canvas of a giant torso fight. It displeases me. Anyway, after you've turned Impachi into Blazing Impachi into Charcoal Impachi and made some barbecue so awesome that everyone thinks it's priceless, obscure fucking reference ahoy, the pirates show up with their captain and kidnap Spyro for their tournament, bringing their excursion in the woods to a close. It should be apparent that there are some key structural differences between the Legend of trilogy and the original Spyro games. Most prominently that while the latter were pseudo-open world games with an emphasis on collectibles, the former take a linear approach with a focus on story. Personally though, I don't have a problem with the direction the series took. Of course, we do have to then question whether the story is told well, and more to the point, worth telling. Because nobody wants to read the fable of Floppy the paraplegic pillar of the community written in shit down the centre of a highway. Back to Alexander the Salamander, he wakes up in a cell aboard a pirate vessel. Man, Spyro spends more time unconscious than a narcoleptic Snorlax.
Swing low, sweet chariot.
This next chunk of gameplay takes place during the Pirates tournament in the form of a short boss rush interwoven with cutscenes. This breaks up the game decently, and to be honest I don't really know how else you go about melding this whole gladiator shtick into gameplay, but it does feel a bit stunted by the third time you're brought out to be gawped at. Like the penny whore you are.
You just stand there. This ain't no puppet show.
There's a word to describe this character, but it's not quite coming to me. Anyway, the fights themselves. First one is against the Super Scorpion Bros. These are more mini-bosses than a full-fledged boss fight, but they'll still wreck you impressively. They're fast enough that if the camera was just the slightest bit worse, I'd call this fight bullshit, and they can't be attacked until you break their guard with a lift. 1v1, they're pretty easy. It's just getting to that point without the two of them double penetrating you that's the challenge. Oh, and Spyro passes out yet again at the start of this fight to unlock his Earth powers. But as previously stated, the Earth powers are as effective as a suit of armor made from fresh salmon against a large bear, so I'm just gonna gloss right the fuck over that. Second up is this flying ship contraption. Basically, you just avoid a few projectiles in a slow charge until the driver crashes for a bit and you can flame his literal ass. For the second phase, the ship speeds up and the camera is legitimately too slow, so that you won't know where the dude is half the time. The final one is the Executioner, who's just a big version of every standard melee enemy in the game, and clearly just a Roman legionnaire that must have been thrown together after the creativity budget ran out in the office that day. If my child handed me this, it would not go on the fridge, and that child would not be eating that night. Once he goes down, a final contender comes out in the form of Cinder, but as they're discussing how to rotisserie these chickens, the pirate fleet is raided by the ape guys from before. They snatch Cinder, but give Spyro a window to escape. The following level consists of Spyro rampaging across the pirate fleet in search of a map to the Chronicler's Island. There's a slight puzzle element thrown in to spice things up, which almost without fail comes down to either using your bullet time or loading and firing a cannon at some unsuspecting boxes with box wives and box families that you just crippled financially. The combat encounters do, to be fair, scale up in challenge considerably as this stage goes on. The devs don't fuck around with plebeian concepts like waves of enemies, particularly towards the end. There's fight sequences where they cracked open a can labeled Standard Enemy Encounter, shrugged, opened the rest of the 8-pack and then emptied the resulting bucketful into an arena. This last one just seems like them seeing how many dudes they can fit into one place before it takes on the vibe of a custom Doom map made by a 15-year-old with an itchy trigger finger. While the enemy design is pretty sweet here and throughout the game, most enemies appear reskinned in at least 2 levels. The pirates are nearly mechanically identical to the ape guys from before, and they didn't even fucking try for the attack dogs. I feel like if they spent a little more time differentiating enemies in terms of gameplay, the combat could have been potentially more stimulating and less obviously just the combat segments. Speaking of combat, I noticed while researching that the main point of contention cited by the glowing paragons of gaming journalism that are IGN and GameSpot was that the difficulty was too high. IGN went so far as to call the combat unfair, while GameSpot went even further, purporting that the slow-mo mechanic was necessary to simply stay alive. Not only can I tell you firsthand that this is bullshit, but even if it was true, so fucking what? They're complaining that a central mechanic of the game is a central mechanic of the game. The combat is challenging, but respectful to the player in its being so. I really can't imagine the gameplay experience being improved by making the fight sequences inconsequential cakewalks. Hey, 2007 GameSpot, how's about you strap on your big boy bollocks and get good, scrubs? Back again to Puff the Magic Dragon. He reaches the captain's quarters via glorious faceplant and finds the map. Captain Scab and the avian Chuckle Brothers wander in and engage Spyro. Scab's first phase is melee focused with the occasional ranged hook attack, while the second is the opposite, with a blend of automatic and spread fire. I like the bullet hellish feel this part has to it. Also, Scab just looks awesome, with that treasure chest built into his back and a motherfucking minigun peg leg. After the second phase, Scab shoots out the window and these 2 flying rats somehow carry this hulking moron away, so Sparx and Spyro give chase. When the captain inevitably evades the pair, they take to hopping from ship to crumbling ship as the fleet falls apart around them. There's a few extended gliding descents, a lot of jumping between these little rowboats, and yet another fight with one of those fucking rider dudes. I should point out that this part of the level lasts for like half an hour and gets old really quick. Eventually you catch back up with Scab on this floating platform that appears to be held aloft solely by the necessity for closure. This second leg of the boss fight is short and snappy, but punishing us all hell if you're sloppy. Scab starts off with melee attacks like before, but is much more aggressive and has a more diverse moveset. A few grunts enter the fray, and after they're defeated, or more often after they hurl themselves to their demise, he imbues his sword with the classic blackcurrant moon energy. Using this, he fires out AoE blasts of varying durations, which I like as a sudden test of your platforming timing amidst the combat. Additionally, Scab will also call down the occasional fucking airstrike just when you thought you had him to ruin your whole day. When you finally beat him through a combination of dragon time, fire, and swearing, Scab plummets into the sea, leaving his 2 annoying prick masters behind. Sparx motherfucking KOs the Blackbird and then the other one pisses off. With their work done, Bonnie and Clyde set out to finally meet the Chronicler. But not before Spyro has another one of his sleepy times and drops out of the sky like a fucking down Messerschmitt. Spyro wakes up, now equipped with nifty electric abilities, at the entrance to the Chronicler's domain, after apparently having been carried to the shore by this cute fucking turtle bro. After pressing on through the entrance, you complete some platforming segments and defeat more of those stone warriors from the dreams. Oh, and these guys that are just sentient sentient flames from what I can tell. Also, minus points for being able to use fire attacks against a guy who is himself a fire. That's like using cough medicine against a lean addict, for fuck's sake. Past all that, you reach this courtyard in front of a temple. Spyro beats up some ball spiders, places said balls on pedestals, and then hits them with the corresponding power to open the way inside. He follows a floating book to a room with 4 large colour-coded doors, and you can probably guess the turn this shit takes. From here, Spyro is required to complete a trial pertaining to each of his elemental powers. This is easily the worst part of the game, clearly just there to pad runtime. I'd describe it as explicitly video gamey, where your suspension of disbelief is obliterated, and the lack of any link between your actions and the story or world brings the fact that you're playing a Los Videos Juegos to the forefront of your awareness. I mean, the design of some of these trials isn't bad, such as this ball-busting platforming segment in the fire one, or the way you have to search around this lake for 3 buttons to activate in the ice one. But still, these should have been unlockable challenge levels, not mandatory to your advancement. After you complete all the trials and the corresponding dull spirit dude, you fight this so-called element dragon. I think she's supposed to be a dream version of Evil Cinder from Spyro's memory or something, but it's not elaborated on, so fuck it. This is a fairly simple gimmick fight, all things considered. She changes elements at random throughout the battle and can only be damaged by attacks using the element she's currently presenting. Her melee moveset is pretty limited, and crucially doesn't change with her element, which seems like a massive missed opportunity to me. When she goes down, the last pair of doors open and you finally come face to face with the Chronicler. This old timer, who I think is my favourite piece of design in the game, starts eloquently story jumping almost immediately after you meet him, filling in some holes in the overarching plot. I haven't said much about the game's story thus far, primarily because, while serviceable, it's entirely unremarkable. To sum it up, the first purple dragon was a dude called Malefor, who became so powerful that the Guardian Dragons exiled him, at which point he formed an army of apes. However, as his power grew, the landscape around him warped and engulfed him into a mountain known as the Well of Souls. Now that the 2 moons are about to align in what is referred to as the Night of Eternal Darkness, and perplexingly, not the Eternal Night, spirits led by the Ape King Gaul are rising again in the hopes of restoring the Dark Master Malefor to his former glory. The Chronicler suggests Spyro should wait out the NOET on his island, but Spyro says fuck that pussy shit and sets out to rescue Cinder from the apes. MacGuffin plot points galore, but fuck it, I wasn't expecting Tolkienian literature. Although speaking of Tolkien, this plot does bear a striking resemblance to a slightly more prestigious fantasy tale where some losers go on a quest to an evil mountain to stop a bad guy coming back to life. Man, Elijah Wood, that is some next level typecasting. And so, Spyro rocks up outside the Well of Souls, ready to kick ass and make flames. I like the gloomy, subdued purples and dark blues of the environment, gives some weight to this final assault. Unfortunately, a good chunk of this stage is fairly repetitive. You'll enter a courtyard, murder a fucking legion of ape dudes, exit via a corridor with a homing laser in it, enter another courtyard and dance the same dance all over again. Push through all that and the level does improve. There's a bit where you have to dodge explosive barrels and one where you have to scale the side of the mountain until you reach this large suspicious looking platform. This right here is the real final boss. Like, there is a defined final boss. It's this bastard here, Gaul. But this fight right here, this is the main event. It's a literal 6-minute long wave of grunts and mini-bosses, many of which have multiple phases all crammed into this small space. It's really fucking tricky actually. You have to manage your Dragon Time ability supremely carefully to preserve your health throughout. And you know what? I really enjoyed it. This is what a final stage should be, a test of all the skills you've learned up to that point. You should have to work for those credits. When you eventually roast the final skeleton, now standing knee deep in the remains of your foes, you carry on to find another, yes, another cunting Batrider. My god, they recycled this same fight 4 fucking times. They must have been so proud of it. Or perhaps the game director just had a bat fetish. Who am I to judge? I mean, we'd all fuck Rouge the Bat. So there's a last bit of platforming and finally you reach the peak. The buddy cops exchange a last bit of banter.
What is this?
It looks like the entrance to a horrible pit of despair.
Before they dive bomb down the core of the mountain.
Woo! Woo!
Gaul is there to greet them and sicks Cinder on Spyro. She attempts to help him by going for Gaul's staff, but he swats her out of the air like a large scaly fly and hops down to take on Spyro personally. To start off, Gaul teleports around firing projectiles, before launching into insta-kill AoE leap attacks. After you deplete his first health bar, the ground breaks and you fall to a lower level of the mountain, right as the moons align and the night of spooky ghosts begins. Spyro gets caught in the beam and starts to channel the power of Malefor with a dark new elemental ability. Now this looks cool, but it's shitty game design. Remember when I said that a final stage, and therefore ultimately a final boss, should be a test of your skills up to that point? Well, if you change the rules right at the end, sacrificing gameplay consistency for a ludonarrative set piece, there's no payoff, no satisfaction to be had. It's like studying for a calculus test, only for the questions to be written in fucking Elvish. Or, considering how OP Dark Spyro is, for the questions to be on Basic Edition. There's no point talking about Gaul's second phase, seeing as Dark Spyro's infinite ranged beam completely shreds him. The Ape King goes down, but with the rate the place is falling apart, there's no chance of escape. Spyro freezes them all in some sort of suspended animation, leaving on a cliffhanger for the third game in the trilogy, Dawn of the Dragon, to pick up from. The Eternal Night is, I think, a severely underrated game. It's not perfect, obviously. Some of the levels are overlong to the point that the charm of the aesthetic gives way to the monotony of staring at the same textures for an hour straight. The boss fights are, as we used to say in the ghettos, substandard at best, and there are definitely a few questionable design choices. But honestly, I still think it's a top tier PS2 platformer. I've already gushed over how great the game looks, from the art style to the animations. What I haven't mentioned is the quality of the sound design, particularly the SFX. The production values are just off the charts all round. The platforming is solid, if occasionally lacking in precision, and the combat is challenging, with a commendable amount of variety to it. The characters range from forgettable to surprisingly well written, with Spyro hitting that sweet spot of put upon every man with a strong moral compass. What the story lacks in depth is more or less made up for in the performances of the big names in the cast, making the whole thing feel almost theatrical, especially Billy West, who has several great lines and steals the spotlight in every scene he's in. To put a bow on it, it's just a good, wholesome experience. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go take a nap. No, I'm not procrastinating, I'm unlocking the ability to edit faster. Well, if you were so smart and funny, how would you end the video? Hey guys, thanks for getting this far into the video. If you enjoyed, or if you're a Spyro fan like this entity, feel free to drop a like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more. My social media links are in the description. There's links to my previous video on screen right now. And yeah, hope to see you next time. Bye bye.